So behind me here is my 75-gallon reef-ready tank. In my video today, I'm going to be talking to you guys about why I chose the tank I did and how you guys can choose the right tank for you. I'm going to start out by talking about the most popular options when it comes to buying a tank. So now when it comes to buying a tank, you have a couple options. The most common option people will think of is probably just the fish tanks that they sell in your pet store, you know, basic tanks. Some of them come with stands, some of them don't. You can buy them as a package or whatever. There are lots of different pet store tanks, but for the most part, they are all the same thing. They are just a glass aquarium with nothing else. Nothing fancy or anything like that. It's just a basic glass aquarium, and they come in pretty standard sizes such as 5 gallons, 10 gallons, 20 gallons, 29 gallons, 40 gallons, 55, 75, and so on. And then there are options such as the one I have behind me, which are reef-ready tanks. Now, reef-ready tanks are basically labeled as reef-ready because they come with an overflow or multiple overflows depending on the size of the tank already installed, which is what you see right here. Now, they also come pre-drilled. That means that behind the overflow here, there are 2 holes drilled in the glass on the bottom panel of the tank. And another version of a reef-ready tank would be something such as the ones that Red Sea sells. I believe they are called the Red Sea Reefers. I may be wrong. If I am, I will fix myself on the screen here. They basically come like everything you need. They come fully equipped for a reef. They are the most reef-ready that you will get, whereas this reef-ready tank here is just the stand, and this one did come with a bit of plumbing. Every tank obviously is going to be different depending on the brand. Some of them will come with more things, but those are the basics. Reef-ready tanks such as this one you see here that come with the overflow installed and drilled, and then things like the Red Sea Reefer, again I'll correct myself if I'm wrong, that come with everything included. And now the last option you have is custom tanks. I will be talking about those as well. Now we will start off with just the basic pet store tanks, and we will list the pros and cons of them. I will start with the pros. So the first pro I can think of when it comes to basic pet store tanks is that they are probably going to be your cheapest option out of all of the ones I mentioned. Reef-ready tanks and custom tanks are definitely going to be a little more expensive than just your everyday standard pet store tank. They will definitely be the most affordable. Another pro to them is that they are super easy to find. As long as you have a pet store near you, anything, it can be a fish store or even just something like PetSmart or Petco or anything like that, they will be easy to find. I guarantee you, if you're looking for just a basic everyday pet store tank, you will have no trouble finding one because they are available at so many places in so many different sizes. So another big pro to them is that you have a lot of different size options. In the pet stores, you can typically find anything from like a 2.5 gallon all the way up to like 125 gallon. Now those are the sizes I've seen in the pet stores near me. Yours may be different. They may have less, they may have more. It's all going to depend on the store, but I'm just going based off what I have seen in my stores around me. I have seen everything from like 2.5 gallon glass tanks all the way up to 125 gallons. And another pro is that you can usually buy whatever you're looking for. If you are looking for just a tank, you can get that, and if you are looking for a tank and a stand, you can usually find that as well. So overall, the main pros to just your everyday pet store tanks is that they're going to be super easy to find. They will be affordable. You have lots of options, and you can typically get what you need. If you need both a tank and stand, you can get that. If you need just the tank, you can get that too. One other big pro to these is that you can often find them being sold, like used tanks being sold. So these will be even cheaper than buying one new, but just know sometimes used tanks aren't always the most reliable. So if you are going with a used tank, make sure it is sealed very well, make sure the condition is okay, and all just that common sense stuff, you know, make sure it is in good condition before you use it. So now let's talk about the cons to the basic pet store tank. The basic pet store tank is typically not meant for a reef tank. So it is not going to come with overflows, it is not going to be drilled or anything like that. So with that being said, that means you're going to be spending some extra money on an overflow. You may want to drill it yourself or anything like that. So just know that will be an extra cost and extra work. Another con to pet store tanks is that they are not always the best quality. Obviously, a brand new tank is going to be reliable, but not always the best quality as some like reef-ready tanks and like full sets will be. A lot of the reef-ready tanks and full kits such as the Red Sea Reefer are made very high quality tanks. Now when it comes to the pet store tanks, yes, they are still reliable. I'm not saying that they are bad tanks, but just know they may not be as high quality as some of the more fancy tanks are. Another con to basic pet store tanks is that some of them are made out of tempered glass. Now, tempered glass cannot be drilled, meaning if you have a tempered glass aquarium, you are going to need a hang-on back overflow, which usually isn't preferred. Yes, it works, but many reefers stay away from them, but that will be a video for another time. So if you plan on buying a pet store tank, just know that you are probably going to have to spend some extra money on extra equipment such as your overflow and your plumbing, and you may have to put in some extra work such as drilling the tank. Or you may end up wanting to pay someone else to drill the tank for you. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the reef-ready tank like I have here. So this tank, all included, came with the tank, the stand, the glass lids. I know you can't see them, but they are here. Glass lid, the overflow, and some of the plumbing. So overall, this reef-ready tank came with a lot of the stuff I already need, which makes it less work for me and less things that I have to buy. A reef-ready tank came installed with an overflow, which you see here, which all reef-ready tanks do. Some of them will have 2 overflows, some will have more than 2, depending on the size of the tank. The bigger you go, the more overflows it's going to have. Now, along with the overflow, it also came drilled. But behind the overflow tower here, there are 2 holes drilled in the glass, which allow it to drain down into the sump underneath. Now, along with that, it also came with my plumbing kit, which is what you see here. So in this plumbing kit, it includes the overflow pipe and the return pipe. All of the equipment that I need for that. Everything that you see here is included in this kit, including the nozzles, the bulkheads, and everything like that. So this essentially came with the majority of the things that I'm going to need to get started with the reef tank, which is a huge pro. So now that I've talked a little bit about these reef-ready tanks, let's go ahead and list the pros and cons. The pros of the reef-ready tank, like you see here, are that they are fairly affordable. They are fairly affordable. They will be a little bit more expensive than basic pet store tank, but they really are not that much more. I'm actually going to go ahead and tell you some of the prices that I spent on this tank here. So I live in Canada, so everything I'm saying is in Canadian prices. Just keep that in mind. So I bought this tank from one of my local fish stores. This is a 75-gallon reef-ready, and it was sold for $2.99, about $300. Now they also sell a 75-gallon non-reef-ready, just a basic 75-gallon tank, and that sells for $1.99. So this was $100 more, but it came drilled, it came with the overflow, and it came with the plumbing. So that is a big convenience for me. But now, if I go to PetSmart and I buy a 75-gallon tank, not reef-ready, just a basic 75-gallon, it costs $350. So this tank here was $300, and a non-reef-ready tank at PetSmart was $350. So this is actually less than what I would be paying if I bought a non-reef-ready one at PetSmart. Now, of course, the prices are going to vary depending on where you live, but that is just my example. So yes, reef-ready tanks will typically cost more than a non-reef-ready tank, but even then, they are still fairly affordable. They really don't cost that much more. First of all, a pro to them is that they are still fairly affordable. Another big pro to reef-ready tanks is that they come already drilled. So that means that you don't have to do any work drilling the tank yourself, and you don't have to pay anyone else to drill it for you. Another big pro to a reef-ready tank is actually just the way it looks. With the overflow here, it is going to hide basically all of the equipment, so you are not going to see the overflow pipes, you're not going to see the return pipe and anything like that. It is a very sleek design, so you're not going to see a bunch of equipment everywhere, all messy all over the place, if you know what I mean. So that is a big plus to reef-ready tanks in my opinion, honestly just the look of them. Another big pro is the fact that it comes with the overflow already installed. So this way you don't have to worry about installing your own, you don't have to silicone your own in, you don't have to drill your own in, you don't have to whatever, you don't have to worry about a hang-on back overflow. So that is a huge bonus. So now let's talk about some of the cons to a reef-ready tank. Reef-ready tanks are typically only sold in larger sizes. I know at least at the store near me, they only sell 75 and up reef-ready tanks. So if you want something smaller such as a 40-gallon, you can't get that in a reef-ready tank, at least around here. Maybe you can where you live, but I can't. So that is definitely one con to them, is that you can typically only buy a reef-ready tank in larger sizes. Another con to them is that yes, they are a little pricier than standard pet store tanks typically, but in my opinion they are still well worth it. Also, another con to them may be that it is not customizable. That doesn't really matter to me, but some people may not like that. Some people don't like the look of these tall overflow towers. Some people prefer it in the center of the tank and things like that. So to some people that may be a con. Another big con is that depending on where you live, they may be hard to find. I know most of the stores near me don't sell them. I only have one aquarium store near me that sells reef-ready tanks, so I only had one option to go to get mine. Most places such as pet stores like PetSmart, they don't sell reef-ready tanks, so depending on where you live and the pet stores you have near you, they may be a bit harder to find. So now another version of the reef-ready tanks are things that I mentioned, such as the Red Sea Reefer. Again, I'll correct myself if I'm wrong on that name, but that is another version of a reef-ready tank, but they typically come with a little more than tanks like this do. I believe they come with a sump already and some more equipment, so that is an added bonus, is they come with like everything you need, but a big con to those ones is that they are very expensive. So if you're on a budget, I definitely do not recommend those like full equipped tanks because they are very expensive. But if you can afford it, I would go for it. They are very nice tanks. They come with everything you need, so that's a big bonus. And they are very nice looking. They have a very slick design to them typically. So those are the added pros and cons to those tanks. So now the last option that I'm going to be talking about is custom tanks. Now, a custom aquarium is a good option for a lot of people because you basically have no limit. You can typically get whatever size you want. You can get it drilled if you want in certain places. You can get certain overflows installed. You can do whatever you want basically, and usually you have a choice of material if you want a glass tank or if you want an acrylic tank. Also, with custom aquariums, you can typically get different shapes, so you're not limited to the standard rectangular shapes you see here. You have the option to get like cubes or tall tanks. Some of them will do bow front tanks. You can just get strange shapes, hexagon stuff. Your options are basically limitless when it comes to custom tanks. So if you're looking for something unique and special, that is the way to go. Let's talk about the pros and cons when it comes to custom tanks. So the pros would be that your options are limitless. You have a choice of material. You basically can just do whatever you want, and they are very nice tanks. Now, there are obviously some cons to them though. Custom tanks are very expensive, like really expensive. So they are definitely not for you if you're on a budget. Custom tanks can also take a while to be made. So if you are very impatient like me, then it may not be the best option for you because they can take a while to be made. Custom tanks can also be fairly hard to find. Typically there are mostly just a couple big retailers that sell them online, so you should be okay, but depending on where you live, they definitely can be hard to find. So now that we've went over the pros and cons of all of these tanks, maybe you have a good idea of what best suits you. You want to get just a basic pet store tank. You want to get a reef-ready tank like I have here. Do you want to get one of the fancier reef-ready tanks, or do you want to get a custom tank? All of these are suitable options, just so you know. I'm not saying like don't get this one and definitely get this one. They are all options for you. It's really up to you to decide what is going to work best for you. So now that I have said all of that, I'm going to talk about why I chose the tank that I did. So in my opinion, this was just the best option for me. It was the most realistic. I knew I wasn't going custom tanks because those are just definitely out of my budget. I cannot afford that. And I didn't want to go to like the fancier reef-ready tanks because again, those are just out of my budget. I also didn't want to go with a standard pet store tank because I wanted one that was already drilled. I wanted one that had an overflow installed, so that is why I went with this one. This was definitely what I was looking for within my budget range. I really like that this already has an overflow installed. I like that it is already drilled, so I don't have to worry about doing that, and I like that it came with some of the plumbing, so I don't have to worry about going to the store and finding the right pieces just to end up having them not fit or anything like that. So this tank is definitely what I was looking for and within my budget range. So now that we've talked about the different options of tanks, I'm going to talk about tank size quickly. Almost every single reefer will agree that bigger is better and to go as big as you possibly can. And I would agree with this for multiple reasons. So let's get into talking about why bigger tanks are better. The first thing I'm going to say is how I mentioned earlier that oftentimes reef-ready tanks don't come in smaller sizes. So that is another reason why that they may be better. If you're looking for a reef-ready tank, you're probably going to have to go with at least a 75 gallon. Now, other than that, the main reasons that I think that bigger tanks are better are, one, it is easier. Now, that may sound weird to a beginner. A lot of people who don't know much about fish automatically assume that it's going to be easier to take care of a small tank just because it's little, whatever. Honestly, just a very common belief. And I understand. The bigger your tank is, the better it will establish itself. When you have more water volume, there is more room for error. If you have a 5-gallon tank and you make a little mistake, then it could end in a big disaster. Whereas when you have a 75-gallon tank, if you make a little mistake, it's not that big of a deal. More water volume, like I said, just leaves more room for error, which is definitely good for a beginner. Another reason I would recommend going bigger rather than smaller is that a lot of saltwater fish need big aquariums. A lot of the very pretty, common, fancy fish that most people fall in love with do require quite large aquariums. So because of that, I would definitely recommend going with a bigger tank. If you get a smaller tank, oftentimes people end up wanting fish that they can't get, and then they wish that they got a bigger tank. So because of all of this, I would recommend getting the biggest tank you can afford and have room for. That is why I personally chose this 75 gallon. I have just the right amount of space for it. If anything bigger wouldn't really fit in my apartment too well, so I went with the 75 gallon because it is still quite large, but it is not too big that it wouldn't fit in my apartment. If you can go bigger though, I would definitely recommend going bigger, such as like 120 gallons, 150, whatever. The bigger, the better when it comes to reef tanks. Just keep that in mind. Now, that being said, it is not impossible to keep a smaller reef tank. If you live in an apartment, or even if you still live at home and you're just in your bedroom, whatever your reasons are, if you can only have a small tank, you can still make it work. Just be cautious. Just know when you have less water volume, it's easier to make a mistake, so just be aware of that. I'm saying it's impossible to run a small saltwater aquarium, but it is easier to use a bigger one. Now, there are also a couple tanks that I would recommend avoiding, and one of those would be a 55 gallon tank. Now, a lot of people like 55 gallon tanks because they are 4 feet long, so they look really big and they're fairly tall. They look very similar to a 75 gallon, but the thing is they are only 12 inches wide. It makes it difficult to have a reef tank in. Reef tanks are primarily made up of rock. You don't really have fake decorations like you do with a freshwater tank or live plants. Your whole structure is going to be made out of rock. When you have a tall, narrow tank, it is very hard to pile rock up and make it look nice. Because of this, I would recommend avoiding the narrow tanks. I would definitely go for a tank that is at least 18 inches wide. A 75 gallon tank here is 18 inches wide and 18 inches tall and 48 inches long. So because of the width on it, it is going to be easy to scape when it comes time. Whereas if I had gotten a 55 gallon, it would be a lot harder because of how narrow it is. So because of this, I would always recommend going with a tank that is at least 18 inches wide. The smallest standard tank that is 18 inches wide is going to be a 40 gallon breeder. Now, of course, there are going to be some odd shapes, like I believe a 35 gallon cube, and if you go custom, you can get, you know, whatever. But the most standard tank that you will get 18 inches long is a 40 gallon breeder. So in my opinion, I would really recommend getting nothing less than a 40 gallon breeder. 75 is even preferred because then it has more water volume, but ultimately the choice is up to you. Get what is going to make you happy. Get what you can afford, get what you have room for. All of it, this is all your decision. I'm not here to say you need a big tank. I'm just telling you that a big tank is typically easier. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hopefully you learned some things about tanks today. Hopefully this helped you decide what tank is going to be best for you. Do you want a custom tank? Do you want a standard aquarium? Do you want a big tank? Do you want a small tank? There's so much that goes into it, and I hope I made this choice a little bit easier for you. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a big thumbs up. Also be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next episode of this series. It will likely be coming out next Saturday, next Friday. So thank you guys so much for watching. Also be sure to check out all of my social media. Everything is just MSM99. It will be in the description below. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.